Before we move into tonight's discourse, let me quickly highlight this is the second time I'm recording this video. The first one had to be cancelled out as a consequence of sound. Of all the things I had visualized that would happen, I never thought sound would be one of them. Anyways, it was an oversight on my own end. What I discussed in the previous video was something that had to do with masculinity and how scammers are out there to reduce and oversimplify a concept in an attempt to get paid. But for the sake of time and the length of that kind of video, we'll pivot into a pressing subject, one I believe you would share interest in. We'll talk about finances and two things engaged perfectly translate you from poverty to wealth. As usual, these are very unique concepts. They've never been said in this fashion. Majority of people on the internet find one concept, distill it with personal examples, use it as their origin story, confusing you, the listener, to make it seem as though success leaves clues. And if every single influencer converges to one point, then that must be it. I'm here to share that there are various ways to arrive at a destination. There are various ways to arrive at a destination. In fact, the metrics to arrive at a certain destination sometimes can be the time. How long does it take you to get from point A to point B? If you use by air and the guy who goes through roads, the time frame can never be congruent. You can also go through the route of path. There are roads if you take, you arrive the destination shorter than others. There are things you know in your own personal life as shortcuts. So the point I want to highlight would diverge from the mainstream idea of how to get well, which is work hard, go to the gym, wake up by 4 a.m. Unfortunately, people sell this narrative. If you do not conform to these ideals, like getting up early, and if you wake up by 4:05 instead of 4 a.m., you are not eligible for success. My friend, all of that are bullshit. They know it as well as I do. Unfortunately, why it seems as though they are right is because you believe them too. And what the man believes in his heart, as a man thinketh, so he is. Your belief is what aids the externalities. Your ignorance is as powerful, or the devil is as powerful as your ignorance makes him to be. The Bible is only profitable once you understand and believe. That's why it said when you pray, you should believe that you already have your desires. For a drug, extensive studies has been conducted in the medical field. Let's draw from that examples because we cannot speak on a subject as sensitive as this and not touch on the medical field. For a drug to be passed into bill, patients are divided into two groups. One, administered with the correct drug. The second, with a placebo pill. For peasants and softs who don't understand the meaning of placebo, it's basically chalk. What doctors use to cure hypochondria. Hypochondria means the belief that you are ill, mostly utilized when one is trying to avoid problems or trying to avoid responsibilities. The kind you fake when you want to avoid school or take that leave, those kind of illness. The doctors devising a means more profitable and healthier than locking horns with the patient, trying to dispute his claim. You are not healed, you're perfectly healthy. So that's where placebos come into play. Two people or the patients are divided into two groups. One administered with the real deal, the other the placebo. So if the patients on the other end respond to treatment more than the patients receiving the actual drug, it will be passed into bill. We extrapolate this concept to our idea of belief. Belief. So once you believe those gurus that waking up by 4:05 instead of 4 a.m. somehow discredits you from the queue of success, it becomes true in your life. I've shared this story of my previous mentality. Come home for holidays, bulk up, go back to college, become lean. I conducted a study, a research myself. This was years ago. I got the exact same thing I would eat at home in school. And although I went through the exact same process as holidays, I found myself growing lean. Taking it a step further, I went home, and although I ate less, I found myself gaining weight. Why is this the case? Belief. Once you have subscribed to a mental model and you truly believe, it becomes your reality. So belief is very powerful in that existence. That's not the discourse of tonight. The discourse is how to become wealthy. I'm already pissed off at the idea. 50 minutes of my time was spent ranting, pointing fingers, educating, and all of the emotions poured into making the video happen. In fact, you can see or picture the unsavagery in my face when I discovered there was no sound. It's my fault. In fact, it's one of those cases the universe tests to see if you subscribe to your own mental model of persistence, resistance, discipline. Majority in my situation would have called it quits. Wait till tomorrow because I have a lot on my plate. There are financials to look at. There are companies to drive the unique system, the business model. So there are a lot of things to do with my time. Putting this video up till the next day or till whenever is justifiable. So you guys are extremely lucky in that regard. Anyways, one of the ways to be wealthy, as usual, this is not mainstream advice, is through ownership. 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 As easy as this sounds, it's one of the most overlooked concepts in business. Every single financial principle boils down to this concept: ownership, assets, stocks, rental properties. It boils down to ownership. In order to generate wealth, you need to own something. If you do not make money through ownership, it means you have to work for every dollar in your account. If you do not make money through ownership, or if you do not own nothing, it means your time is connected to your income. You might think that's a good thing, What happens when you're sick? Income plummets. So let's talk about something now, but that's way beyond the purview of tonight's discourse. Ownership is one of the ways to get wealth, is one of the ways to retain wealth. The Bible says, strong men retain wealth. If you've gotten to this point of the video, your question would be, I understand this concept of ownership, but I do not have the wherewithal for execution. That is the scenario most people find themselves in. They've read the business book, they've attended the seminar, yet they find it difficult for capital generation. One of the ways to generate capital is first, find something you're good at, double down on it, find a way to commoditize that activity, and you'll be fine. Unfortunately, anything that is gotten easy is generally unappreciated. That's why most people err in the opposite direction. Firstly. Secondly, the consecration demand associated with the materialization of this activity is absurd. I was speaking to a guy who made a living asking people what they do to make a living. If you observe the activity from an external standpoint, why do you waste your youthful years going from one flashy car to the other, hoping they tilt down the window and beg for a 2 minute interview? Yet, he has scaled to the point where he has all these fake influencers in his DM begging for him to ask them a question to make it appear as though you're legit, including payment. So if you picture the activities it takes for that result to come, it appears stupid. It doesn't make sense. And to the logical individual, guess what? He never starts because he's too cautious. Unfortunately, especially if you're a young man listening, as you appreciate in age, the more riskier it is to take risk. As a young man, you can risk your 20s because there is no burden, especially financially, attached to it. Now, if you are an outlaw and from a young age you needed to take care of yourself, it's a different discourse in and of itself. In fact, it's most likely you're married. It's most likely nobody really depends on you at that age. So taking risk is profitable. You're not risking, or if you lose every single thing you got, you can sleep at the back of your car comfortably as opposed to do it to the whole family. So the older you become, the more difficult it is to take risk. That's why I spent my 20s ignoring the party, ignoring the women. I didn't waste time. I don't do drugs. I do not smoke. I do not drink. All I care about is work. I do not waste time. Most people come along and say, let's go do something fun. But this is fun. So let me get this straight. You want me to go amongst other peasants and do fun? What? This exact discussion was raised in my circle just yesterday. I said, bro, say we were to go to the club and spend thousands of dollars on bottles, what would be the activity? Yeah, we'll be with hot models. No, no, no. We'll be with hot models, we'll drink, but all of this can be done in our house. Now, I pose this question because I understand we are not degenerates. We are not the kind of guys who go. No, we don't do that here. That's a very good question. Never thought about it because I never picture myself going to the cross. That is exactly the kind of people you need to be around. People who are forward thinking, people who think on how to use technology to revolutionize civilization, people who are forward thinking, people whose head has been broadened. When was the last time in your circle you made someone think? When was the last time you raised the point and someone said, "Ah, I never thought about it like this"? You peasants, you humans, you guys don't think. Anyways, the first way to get wealthy is through ownership. And one of the ways to raise capital to get you to the point of ownership is doubling down on something you love and ignoring the naysayers because the consecration demands is unconventional. The second thing that's like a soft point on the first point, you need to understand, disregard this concept of passion. Once you find something you love doing, something that seems like play to you, but work to others. Unfortunately, it is foolish to believe you will take this advice because every single person knows something that feels like play to them. Why don't they do it? Because it feels like play. The chances of you doing something that feels like play above other difficult things are in the single digits. You will gravitate to other difficult activities that you are totally uninterested in because there is a level of discipline that needs to be invoked, further reinforcing your psychology that you're working hard. Look at your task list. Task list is most likely uninteresting, boring tasks are burdened above what you really want to do. You find yourself procrastinating and wasting time or do 1 hour, take 3 hours because you're not interested. But doubling down on that one thing seems stupid. It seems foolish. How does XYZ lead to my income? How does XYZ change my life? So that's one thing you need to understand. You're never going to subscribe to that concept. Even if you do, it takes a lot of courage, faith, and discipline. So the second key to get wealth, listen very carefully. Adopting this concept takes you from point A to point B. Adopting this philosophy and your life changes. Does that mean every single person within your radius benefits from one teaching? As a consequence, you meet better people. Better people means better relationship. Better relationship means better environment. In the future, you have kids, they already have a curated environment that aims at success from just one principle. So the first one, as I said, ownership. The second, this is the reason why most people never get to the wealthy place, is spending more than you have. Firstly, just because you can buy something doesn't mean you can afford. If you can't buy three of those things, you can't buy one. The reason a huge percentile of people aim the opposite direction, first, they see it as a reprieve. This is coming from someone who is mentally fortitude, consider himself as a very highly disciplined, motivated individual. I recall when I lost thousands of dollars in the market, the tendency to go out, spend a bunch of money in an attempt to pacify my loss was very high. And guess what? I did conform to that belief, of which I quickly snapped out of it and spent 10 hours actively trying to rectify the situation. Now, imagine the average individual who can't stop himself from logging on the website. Exactly, they are doomed. So the reprieve, like that endorphins you release when you make that luxurious purchase you do not need is very high. Secondly, people like to show off. Investing is not attractive. You can't show off your investment. You can't even showing off your company isn't that much of a flex relative to luxury items, luxury cars, luxury houses. You might sit there as an average individual and pretend, I don't care what anybody says. I do not care about people's opinion. The real question is not to adopt this mindset of binary because life isn't. It's not yes or no. It's to what degree do you care about people's opinion. People play around with labels. I'm introvert, I'm extrovert, I'm silent. The real scenario is there are times you like to be introverted, there are times you're an extrovert. It depends on who is in front of you. So stop messing around with labels. In the same form, to what degree do you care about people's opinion? When you make that luxury purchase, a person who would hold you in high regard comes to your mind. That lady at the adjacent cubicle would be impressed by my $250 financed watch. But you get the point. So not uh, buying things you can't afford. And just because you can pay for something, I reiterate, doesn't mean you can afford. Doesn't even mean you should buy. All your income, especially at the infancy of your career, should be channeled towards investing. And you can look at it from a nuanced standpoint. You can spend in an attempt to attract a certain quality of people. That is doable, but going through that route is not advisable because your confidence is now derived from externalities. Again, I have nothing against luxury. To sit here and try and downplay the use of luxury would be hypocrisy, unimaginable. Luxury is good. I'm a luxury user myself. To sit here and try and say I prefer flying business over a private jet would be childish and infantile. Luxury is good, but you need to know when to set priorities. Everything should be channeled towards your business or producing more wealth. Isn't it unfortunate that rich people behave like poor people while the poor ones behave like rich ones? I noticed this in my career where I would try and be liberal in the business and go, yeah, just $5, whatever. But you see rich people, they always account for every single thing. They don't let their personal luxury life seep into their business. If 20 cents go missing, nobody rests until it is accounted for. And when I actually had money, not pretend I'm a millionaire or all of this manifestation bullshit, there was nothing to prove. There's nothing to prove. An interesting story. Usually, previously, years ago, when I would fly, I made it necessary to book an Uber to take a ride back then. it was something of status to be able to use your phone to call down rides. And I know majority have already been desensitized to this level of ease. But remember previously, it's either you call the cab in advance or you had a private driver or some chauffeur on your payroll. This idea of having drivers on an app ready to pick you up was out of reach. So back then, Uber was a thing of status symbol. So I would make sure I order a ride in order to feel wealthy. But as I began to traverse the board, having millions of dollars, I would come down from the flight, take the bus for all I care, and while the passengers are looking at my bag, still with the flight tag, what's this guy doing here? I don't care. I don't give a shit. I'm focused on the next thing. I'm focused on how does my business go from point A to point B? How do I take things to the next level? Now, do I use the bus? No. But just to give you an example of the mental shift, when you actually have money, you stop caring. And yes, there are people on the internet who are insecure and trying to mask their insecurities with layers of luxuries. It's always going to catch up to you. What happens when you lose the car or you lose the house? You need to be forward thinking. The best kind of confidence is to have in yourself, not in cars. Imagine having to drive a certain kind of car in order to get a business deal. How deranged are you? As usual, I'll strike the balance. Luxury is good. Yes, it helps show you are capable to handle that deal. But instead of focusing on luxury, focus on growth. Luxury is a byproduct. When you focus on growth, every other thing begins to grow. When was the first phone you bought? You can't recall and you don't remember giving it out. It's because your level of transformation made it inharmonious for that result to remain. Now, I'm not saying holding an expensive phone is a proof of transformation, but just as an example, sitting here, if you have, let me not put a figure to avoid making a select group feel disenfranchised. But remember, when was the last time you made a deliberate choice to wear X kind of quality? It's because as you grew in your mind, certain clothes, as you change your environment, certain things began to gravitate. Those years in Nigeria, still starting up, I would walk into a thrift store trying to pick up Jordans. I would go through the rigorous process of trying to identify whether it's real or fake, and that was the way I learned how to distinguish fake from real. But as you grew, as you changed environments, all the stores within your vicinity are authentic. That's why some people I see whom I believe are less intellectual and I see them operating in certain dimensions that they themselves are unconscious but are privy as a consequence of their environment. Some streamer, let's still keep it to the apparel sector. Some streamer walks into a Nike store, shops. I see the guy putting on an original Nike socks and I can tell. Now to him, he walked into the store and bought socks. But because he didn't start from the lower echelons of life, he didn't understand the process. Anyways, focus on growth and every other thing is an addition. I find this video to be far more interesting than what I did previously. When life gives you lemons, you make exactly. And as always, my friends, it's a pleasure speaking to you. I'll see you in the next one.